Hello, welcome back to the Auto Market Brief. I'm Erin Keating, your host and industry executive analyst here at Cox Automotive. Today we were widening the circle of what we're talking about because usually we were really focusing in on the retail market, dealers, automakers, et cetera. But we wanted to explore the area that both of my co-hosts here today are very familiar with, which is the commercial side of automotive. The fleets and vehicles that keep goods, services, and businesses moving around America. So joining me today are Zoe Rahim, who is actually a fellow colleague of mine on the Economic and Industry Insights team, focusing on this particular subject matter. So welcome, Zoe. And then we have the esteemed Alex Frazier, good friend of mine here, who actually leads customer operations for Cox Fleet. And we're excited to kind of dive into the business that both of you guys look into. So most of our conversation, again, focuses on consumers, dealers, vehicle sales, but commercial operators really deal in a different realm, if you will. They see the market through a different lens. I think of, utilization, uptime, replacement cycles, freight demand, and what it keeps to really keep their assets moving. So cost of ownership has a completely different definition in that area. And those signals can also often tell us a better health signal for what the broader economy is. So again, it's always great to get your additional insights, Zoe, and wherever we're meeting as a team to talk about what's happening in the market. So Alex, I want to get the audience a bit oriented about Cox Automotive Fleet Solutions, because I think this is an area that most people may not be familiar with, at least our listening audience as of currently. And then Zoe, just bring you in to help connect some of that with what the broader economy is saying. So Alex, why don't you start for listeners who spend most of their time, again, thinking about retail vehicle sales? What are they missing about the commercial side of the business?
Yeah, I think as someone who grew up in the car business on the Manheim side, learning it has been fascinating only because of how vast it is, right? And usually when I'm meeting anybody and I talk about it, just look around the room. Right. Every single thing that you see has been on a truck, but it's probably been on 3 or 4. And that's once it's final assembled, right? But even the parts or components that go into it. And so whether it's the food that we're eating or the supplies at the hospital, whether it's the medicine, the sheets, the bed, right? And of course, cars at the dealership, right? Like how many of those parts were on trucks before they were final assembled? How many of the cars have been on trucks, right? And I think we're all just kind of familiarly blind with all of the trucks on the road because there's so many of them. But when you start to think about what it takes to keep them moving, it becomes a really complicated, interesting business that we did get into about 7 years ago, and it's been a great ride since then. So
it makes me think about the conversation we had earlier on the podcast with Joe George, of course, as he retires from mobility at the end of this year. He was talking about the transportation of everything. This is the heartbeat, and certainly all of us in our neighborhoods. How many times do we see FedEx and Amazon trucks day in and day out? Never mind the mail truck, right? That, thank God, is still running. I'm sure you could tell us a little bit about that. So how large and important is the fleet market, and what specifically are we sort of looking at servicing? What problems are underlying in the business?
Yeah, it's very interesting, the fleet market, how folks define the total addressable market, depending on who you're talking to or what you're talking about. But in general, the repair and maintenance space is broadly considered to be about an $80 to $100 billion TAM.
Wow.
And so it's a pretty massive market.
Sure.
Additionally, it's extremely decentralized.
Sure.
And so there's just a lot of opportunity to help folks understand what's going on. We recently had a client who has 14,000 assets, and they couldn't tell you which ones were good on preventative maintenance and which ones were bad because they left it all up to their local operators. Now, they were doing a great job.
Right.
In general, they were doing an okay job, given that they've effectively had no tools. But this, kind of new leadership team is like, gosh, I feel like we should have overall insight. It's like, yeah, but to then go to each local operator who's used to doing it the way he's always been doing it, and then say, well, we're going to have a little bit more structured program without being domineering or overbearing in it, but just helping them understand the value of the structure, of consolidated pricing, of visibility up, so that corporate actually can help them from a vehicle acquisition, from parts, from all of these things. And so that's just one example in a giant world that is it impacts literally every single person in this country.
And you just mentioned predictive maintenance, and that's become more and more of a word that we even use in just retail vehicles,
Sure.
customers. So tell me a little bit more about why has that become such a big buzzword in the industry, and how are we looking to solve it? I mean, what's helpful there?
Yeah, predictive maintenance, I think, is sort of this, you talked about Joe, like he likes to talk about the golden snitch from Harry Potter. Like
Okay.
we're always chasing. I think the reality of even just better maintenance, more regular maintenance is step one.
Hmm.
Because as you think about predictive, like I think the vision for everybody is we hear from the vehicle, whether it's the truck, the trailer, the component, we can hear it's sick. We go procure the part that it needs. We find out when the vehicle is going to be down. We fix it, and there was ever never any downtime.
Right.
And I think, yeah, like when we get there, it will be amazing. And we actually have seen some tiny pockets of that. We've even actually gotten to do it for a customer where
Yeah.
we called them and told them their truck was broken
Right.
effectively in real time as they were figuring it out.
Sure.
And so they never even had to unload it because our guy from Cox Fleet was on the way with the correct part, fixed it, and they were scrambling. And we got to help them not scramble, which was an amazing one-of-one story.
Sure.
I think when you look at it at scale, the operations of how the commercial truck world works is so intertwined in 17 different things that if the computer is going to tell you to ground that truck for a day, you better really be sure that you have the thing figured out, you have the right part,
Right.
you have the right technician. Because if you don't, what's going to happen is you're going to really lose the faith of all the operators out there, whether they be the technicians, the driver, the local manager, and losing their confidence in all this stuff can be really detrimental. And so some of it is there, and we're certainly trying to bring it forward, but even just getting smarter about how we do normal maintenance.
Sure.
How do we ensure we get the right part? How do we do it right the first time? How do we, not have to do it a second time, right?
Right.
How do you keep those breakdowns to a minimum? That is all real value gain for every fleet in America before we even get to
Right.
predictive maintenance.
I mean, I know how angry my son would be if he ordered something from Amazon last night and that truck broke down and didn't deliver it the next morning like it said, right? So we really don't understand what's really teetering here on the verge of
Every
a
day.
company not understanding
Yeah.
what the needs are. Never mind really important things like medications and refrigerated items and things like this. So, well, Zoe, just flipping over to you, because I know that you update us a lot on the economics of what's going on in the commercial market. And recently you described the market with rising rates and tightening capacity. But freight demand is not exactly like booming. So what's actually happening underneath the surface there?
Yeah, so what we're seeing in the freight market currently is that you are experiencing what's considered a supply side contraction of capacity. So you are starting to see a lot more movement of operators and trucks out of the market than that are coming in. So that's really squeezing the amount of supply available for shippers to use. And so that's primarily driven by a lot of enforcement that's going on with the FMCSA and the DOT cracking down on English language proficiency, on certain foreign CDLs. Of course, there is a more renewed focus on hours of service, especially combating any sort of fraud or misalignment there from the federal government, really focusing in on this part of the industry. So because of that, you are seeing capacity leave the market. And so as capacity is leaving the market, yes, it's led to an increase in spot rates and it's led to an increase in contract rates, but it's not exactly a demand-driven, what we would consider a recovery in the freight market. So all of it's pretty much supply-driven. Demand, especially volumes, are still somewhat muted.
Right.
Now, if you are benefiting from the AI trade, of course, you are probably seeing a lot more favorability in terms of your volumes and your demand. But if you're not, where a lot of sectors aren't necessarily benefiting from the AI trade, especially when you think about what's going on with like housing or CPG, you are having some sort of probably headwinds from a volume demand standpoint.
Right.
Again, supply is still leaving,
Right.
and you are seeing those elevated or increased rates this year, but you're not necessarily seeing that strong demand-driven recovery that you would want to see when you talk about leaving the freight recession and moving into a full-blown freight recovery.
Sure. Now, that's interesting because that makes me think about obviously where the demand would come from, which would be consumers demanding more products or businesses needing more things. So this feels to me like that's where we come into like freight's really an economic signal for us for the health of the economy as a whole. So what does that tell you right now about what you're expecting from your perspective for the rest of 2026 then?
Yeah, so I think it still remains to an AI-driven economy in the U.S., right? When you think about where we're seeing continued growth come from, it is the industrial sector, it is anything related to AI and the AI build out, especially if you're benefiting from the AI capex boom we're seeing, especially from these hyperscalers and these tech companies.
Sure.
And so if you're related to any of those industries, you are seeing a more favorable operating environment. But if you are in a rate sensitive sector or supporting one of those sectors, such as general consumer goods, or especially consumer durable goods, or the housing and residential sectors, you're maybe not seeing that same level of benefit. So for you to continue to see some level of improvement, the broader economy needs to improve. And so for the remainder of the year, the AI boom will continue to drive a lot more of that economic growth. And so we talk a little bit more about the bifurcated consumer. We're seeing that in the U.S. business sector too, right? There is some bifurcation in the sectors that are doing really well and some sectors that aren't necessarily seeing the same level of broad economic growth. And so that's also going to impact operating conditions for a lot of carriers around the U.S. But the one thing that's going to impact them regardless are rising costs, especially with this energy price shock that we're seeing, right? Diesel prices have now moved up for straight weeks, well over $5 a gallon, and remain at levels that we last saw back in 2022. So if you were a carrier coming into this year and you were seeing, okay, general economic conditions are stable, we'll probably print 2 to 2.5% GDP. We'll see improving manufacturing sector and improving industrial production sector.
Right.
You were probably a little bit more optimistic. Then, of course, with the energy price shock, you have now seen some sort of major headwind to your operating conditions. So even with the spot rates and contract rates moving up, you're not necessarily benefiting from all of that move
Right.
in your operations. You are seeing that the fuel prices are starting to put some pressure on you.
Well, the other thing that outpaces on the expense side, like, yes, revenue may tick up a tiny bit for the guys that are out there, but the other thing that's outpacing that is the insurance costs, which impacts both all of the folks driving trucks and trailers, but also all the service providers who we work with to help those guys.
Yeah.
And so I think it's pretty shocking when you start to look into it, and who it impacts the most is the smaller owner operators or the service providers who only have 2 or 3 or 5 trucks. Because, I mean, these are not folks, these are small businesses.
Right.
That is what they are, is they are
Right.
small businesses.
Right.
And so when you look over a 3-year period and your insurance has doubled,
Right.
and just imagine that for your household, right? So if your household insurance goes from $2,000 to $4,000, well, if your business insurance to insure these really big assets goes from $10,000 a year to $20,000 a year,
Right.
but all your revenue went up was $2,000,
Right.
it doesn't cover that,
Sure.
right? And so I think that's another thing that kind of is happening over here,
Of course.
that a lot of the kind of just retail consumer or folks who don't pay attention day in, day out don't realize. But then you look up on basically any interstate in the country and it's like, hey, did you get hit by a truck?
Right.
Well, that's what's driving all these
Sure.
insurance rates up, is there this whole idea of like nuclear and thermonuclear lawsuits, which has become a very regular and real thing in the commercial trucking world,
Right.
which it's just another expense that goes into all this stuff that I think as a consumer, when you're ordering that thing and say, I want it here tomorrow, probably you're just not considering all the costs going into
Sure.
how did that thing arrive at your doorstep.
Which is why I love that we're having this conversation, because honestly, a lot of what you've said mirrors right on top of what we talk about from a retail vehicle sales, even down to the idea that a corporation who owns a decentralized fleet of, operators an OEM has to deal with dealers across the board, and is constantly trying to say, like, how do we homogenize the software we're all using and things like this so that it's easier to manage up. And we know that insurance has gone up for individuals as much as businesses.
Absolutely.
Which actually, the small business brings me to sort of make that connection with dealers and automakers. I mean, we know plenty of automakers, or nearly all automakers, have fleet businesses, right? Whether it's just that they're selling into fleets, or that they actually, like a Ford Pro or GM's program. But then a lot of dealers also manage fleets. So what should automakers and those listening here that are dealers, current dealers, or automakers be thinking about when it comes to fleet?
Yeah, we've had some really, really amazing conversations with both the big guys who make big fleet stuff, so all trucks,
Right.
Also with kind of more traditional OEMs that probably a lot of your listeners are used to. I think the one big thing that's very different from a fleet standpoint versus when you sell a consumer vehicle, your dealership, it's hopefully your dealership's near your home, and you can come get every oil change, every part, and see again in 3 years. And like on a retail consumer life cycle, that checks out. And thankfully for the dealer and for the consumer,
Sure.
that's actually a really healthy and good relationship. I think for a fleet, it's just very different. And so even if you sell somebody an asset and they're using it, the idea that they're going to come back to you every time for service, they're running all over town. Their job is to keep running. Like when that vehicle is down, it's not generating revenue. And so the idea that it's always going to come back to you for service is definitely an adjustment that we're talking through with some of the more light duty OEMs of how do you actually help your consumer or your customer who bought the asset from you find service, even if it's at a different dealer than you bought it from, right? And how do you use the network of all the dealers, which, so now you're telling dealer A, it's okay if dealer B services it. But from a fleet standpoint, that's actually what they need, because it's not that they don't like dealer A or they don't like dealer B. It's like, hey man, I need to keep delivering flowers.
Right.
I need to keep moving medicine. I need to get the food from here to there, and driving all over town just to go back to get my oil change. It's just not practical. Right. And so how do you use the entirety of all that in a way that respects the dealers as independent businesses, but also really understands how the fleet is using the fleet to service them across all of the, the OEM stores that are out there, right? Like this is where having so many dealerships actually really a benefit, but they're not just always used to working in tandem with one another to serve those fleet customers.
So I think that if I'm thinking about the metric that you might be referring to, is this uptime from my own application? Okay, so why is uptime? I mean, where are the unique challenges for fleet businesses when they're thinking, we think about maybe how much, miles do we get to the gallon when we're thinking about ownership, or, yes, can I go 7,500 miles now for my oil change, or in an EV situation? But uptime's a very different metric. So how is that, measured, and what do we need to know about that particular?
And I mean, Zoe has a lot on this too, but like just quickly, like uptime is everything, right? Like it because uptime equals revenue, right? Like all that a fleet's entire function is to actually facilitate revenue, right? And so some of our customers are just traditional trucking companies. So what they do is move A to B. But many of our customers, they might be grocers, they might be moving building products, they might be moving medicine, right? They move all of this stuff. And all they're actually doing is facilitating revenue, right? And so if you think about it from an uptime standpoint, I mean, we have fleets that generally will book out $50,000 a day per asset from a revenue standpoint. So when that asset is down, they don't actually care if it costs $800 or $900 or $1,000 to fix it. They care about the fact that if this thing doesn't start moving, I'm going to lose 50 grand in revenue today. And yes, maybe I can capture it tomorrow. Or maybe they go to the other guy across town because they need it right now, right? Because everybody's, we've just moved to a right now culture. So uptime is what facilitates that revenue. So it's not about anything other than I need to keep my customer happy, and they have very real expectations. And so that's why, total cost of ownership matters, cost per mile matters. Like these are all very real metrics. But actually, at the end of the day, is my truck available to go deliver revenue when I need it is all that matters.
What would you have to add to that from the economic perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think Alex hit the nail on the head when he calls it an asset. It is truly an asset for the business. If it is not operational, it is not supporting your business overall, right? So making sure that it is able to run effectively and efficiently for any of your business support needs is the most crucial thing. And it's not just general freight where you're moving a good from point A to point B and then bring your truck back to point A. You have food service, you have construction, you have materials aspects that all these trucks and assets use. So you can't just think about it in terms of just general goods movement. These vehicles are used in different capacities, but at the end of the day, if they're not moving, they're not supporting your business, and that becomes a liability, right? The assets, which is into being a liability. So as long as it's effectively running through, of course, the appropriate scheduled maintenances, preventative maintenances, just general upkeep, then you all are supporting your business. But if you're not, then it becomes a bigger drag on you.
So this is where, we might want to call AAA on the side because we got a flat tire, and that's an inconvenience. But for fleet operators, this ability to get mobile service and individuals out to be where they are in that moment, it's actually a real revenue crisis, not just an inconvenience.
Well, yeah, and I think one thing that most of us can tie back to is if you've ever been on an airplane and the crew times out.
Right.
The same thing can happen with drivers, right? And so if all of a sudden you have a driver who's so far into his or her out of service or hours of service for the week, and now all of a sudden you've got this truck on the side of the road or stuck at a loading dock, and unlike an airport where they keep extra pilots and flight attendants sitting around so they can switch them out, and yes, it's a delay, but you figure it out. There's not just extra truck drivers sitting around everywhere. And so all of a sudden, this hours of service thing plays into maintenance. And that plays into, if it happens all the time, do the drivers want to work for you, or do they want to go work somewhere else where they're going to get more billable miles they can get paid on? And so this whole thing, there's so many layers to it that I think, again, when you're just driving down the interstate, you're kind of blissfully ignorant to it all. And the more you think about it, you're like, right. And it's all very real.
Yeah. I would think that more people, again, I talked about earlier, like the Amazon truck and the FedEx truck. Interestingly enough, because our economy, as Joe George was explaining, was like, transportation is it, right? Like, I do think, luckily, I think it's become a lot more apparent. Now, granted, we've started to take a little bit for granted, so maybe we still aren't calculating all the demands on the transportation and logistics organizations out there. But you're right. When it's a domino effect and it's interconnected. So speaking of connected, how does connected vehicle data? Now we know that a lot more cars are software defined, and trucks are also moving that way, and so there are ability for telemetry to be able to be analyzed, and this ties into the predictive maintenance, nirvana, et cetera. How does that change the ability to be reactive and deal with things as the plans?
It's massive. That, again, like to start at the most elementary level, where is the truck? Where is the trailer? Like, you would be shocked at how many fleets have tens of thousands of trailers, and at any one time, 500, 1,000, they're just not entirely sure where they are.
My goodness.
And so, if you have 50,000 of something, it's not wild to think, I don't know where 500 are, except they're 53 foot long, and you'd figure they'd be easy to find. And so the first thing is just knowing where they all are, right? And same from an emergency breakdown standpoint. Now you're not saying, I'm just past mile 53, but here in Atlanta, if you get it wrong and you got to go circle back around, that could be an hour later until you get back to that truck. But if you know exactly where it is, you can get there right the first time. And so, location, all joking aside, is a huge piece of it. But it does extrapolate out to all of the things you'd think it does with predictive maintenance, of like catch it when it's got a little bit of stuffed nose before it gets full-blown pneumonia, all that kind of things. I think the other thing that it really is starting to have a cool impact on is actually freight theft, which is a massive issue. Freight theft is a big business. And so it's a bad guy business, but it's a big business. And so now with more cameras and more connected trailer technology and more cameras just in general out in the world, cutting down on freight theft is actually really huge.
Sure.
And there's a whole kind of social network component to it that owner operators participate in, because it's really impacting them
Right.
in a really negative way. Again, back to the insurance thing, right? Like this is
Exactly.
another thing that drives insurance up. And so all of those things can get better. And I think just marrying that new technology with a 100-year-old industry of, well, I'm just getting it from A to B, and how do you bring all that together? It's starting to happen. And I think the best thing is a lot of the operators are starting to see how it benefits them.
Right.
Even with, like, there was a time nobody wanted a camera facing them, right?
Right.
I think we're generally over that.
Right.
Because, no, I wasn't eating, I wasn't smoking, I wasn't sleeping. Well, now you're getting to multicam where, even a couple years ago, if a consumer vehicle drifted and hit the back of a trailer, generally that's always going to be the trucker's fault because, just because.
Yeah.
Well, now if you have cameras going down the side, the trucker can very quickly, like with that, before the police even arrive on scene, they can have a video showing who was actually at fault.
Right.
And it cuts down on the frivolous lawsuits. It cuts down on a lot. And so that's all thanks to connected technology, which really is having a massive impact.
That's very cool. I hadn't even thought about that. And thank you for previewing an episode we are going to have in the future, I'm glad to announce, around the freight fraud and theft and everything. So I'm excited to tackle that topic next. But we would have needed this one in advance to help us see that. I'm curious, I didn't prep you guys for this question, but I'm curious, autonomy and electric, because those are both things that are really moving, even if they're not as high, or we haven't figured them out quite yet for commercial use with retail, with individuals. But we're hearing a lot of cool innovation with autonomy and electric in commercial. So any thoughts on where that's going or what you guys are seeing as far as trends?
Yeah, it's definitely coming. It's of course, adoption is much lower than it is on the light vehicle side, especially for personal vehicle ownership, so at least in the retail market. Now, two reasons for that. Of course, one being just the availability of product, right? There's not as many products in the pipeline or being developed to support any sort of demand on the medium and heavy duty side. So if you start to see an uptake or more products come through the pipeline, you actually might see higher levels of adoption than what we're currently at right now. The other thing, of course, and we've talked about it, is uptime, right? So making sure that you have sufficient infrastructure to support these vehicles is absolutely crucial, right? So if you have an EV today, you'll probably find a charger. You can get something, installed at your house. Doesn't work the exact same way on the medium and heavy duty side. So infrastructure is going to be an even more important factor here. So both of those things will probably lead to a slow, gradual increase in adoption. Again, it'll take a little bit more time, but we're starting to see probably a lot more development is on the autonomous side. We are definitely seeing much more use cases and actual real life pilots on U.S. highways today for the support of Class 8 trucks, or so the large trucks to support general freight occurring on roads. And so almost every month, it seems like you're getting more pilot licenses for piloting programs, or more developments occurring to support one day maybe an autonomous future. And so I think that's where it's very exciting. And this actually goes into some of the telematics thing we just talked about, where if you want to focus on what's happening with autonomous and especially what's happening with telematics and connected vehicles and connected data, look at what commercial vehicles are doing, what fleets are doing. If you're interested in what could be coming down the pipeline for the retail side, because I think what's happening on the commercial vehicle side is developing quicker, I would say, than what we're going to see for regular vehicle ownership or personal vehicle ownership. So if you're interested in that, definitely look at what commercial vehicles are doing, just because it's so important there,
Very cool stuff.
It's business critical, it's revenue critical, it's cost center critical there. So the advancements you're going to see there are going to probably outpace what we're going to see just for someone looking and maybe is interested in any of that.
Yeah, the thing I'd add, you can use it in segments within the commercial space, right? Like for a consumer, autonomy has to go solve everything, right? Like when I go to the doctor, when I go to work, when I drop my kids off at school, whatever, right? Whereas for commercial, it's like, well, can you make an autonomous robot that can carry it around the distribution center,
Sure.
which we know there's there, right?
Right.
Can you do autonomy straight through Texas, which literally happens dozens of times every day right now? Waymo is running autonomous trucks in
Right.
Texas, pulling real freight, right?
Yeah.
But you can do that. And so while it may not take it to the final mile to drop it off at the loading dock and hand the guy the clipboard with the bill of lading, but it doesn't necessarily need to, right? It just does this part. And so
Great point.
I think that's where when you think about it from a commercial standpoint, it can start to kind of chip away at it bit by bit by bit, whereas the consumer is going to look for the whole solution all at once.
Very cool. So I feel like we could talk about this for hours, but I'll just tie it up with one last question for both of you. So either of you or both of you answer, what's one trend in commercial transportation or fleet management that you think automotive professionals need to be paying attention to, that they're probably not paying enough attention to, and you might see out there, 1 to 3 years from now?
I think it's autonomous. I think on the commercial vehicle side, especially on the heavy duty side, it's developing a lot faster than maybe the attention it might be getting in the news media. So that's where we are starting to see a lot more rapid consideration and adoption on the testing front. And so whether it is the traditional OEMs interested in some level of autonomous driving, you also have the startups, and of course let's see what Elon says about the semi.
Sure.
And see how that gets autonomized.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sort of answers your question, but
Go for it, Alex.
no rule has ever been there for you not to
Exactly.
break it.
appreciate it.
I think anybody who listening, the one thing I'd love for you to take away is when you see someone broken down on the side of the highway, in 50 out of 50 states, it's a law to slow down and move over. And in 50 out of 50 states, it's not enforced. And being a roadside provider is actually one of the most dangerous jobs in America. And so thankfully, in the last couple of years, we've moved from once every 6 days, someone passing away in the line of duty, to now we're a little over once every over 8 days.
Oh my gosh.
It's an extremely dangerous job.
I
and
never
so-
knew that statistic.
Yeah. And so one thing I would love to see go down, or I guess in this case up from every so often days, is that we as a society really honor this road space. And if somebody's broken down, give them space. Give them space to work. Give them space to be safe, because it is so wildly dangerous. And we all have these little mini computers that we are looking at all the time. And when you're on the highway, be safe. Because if you want your packages to arrive, if you want there to be medicine, one way we can do that is by keeping service providers and truck drivers safe. And so I would just say the one thing I would love to see, which autonomy can go into and connected can go into, is how do we continue to make it safer and safer on America's highways? Because it is still one of the most dangerous things any of us do every day is get on the highway.
My goodness. I had no
so-
idea. Thank you for that
Yeah,
statistic.
I would love for it to be safer for all of us.
Well, that's a wonderful way to end there. Well, Alex and Zoe, thank you so much for being here. It's not always every day that I get to talk about a whole other topic in the automotive industry that I'm not totally steeped in. So it really gets exciting for me. The biggest takeaways I think I got from this was just that the commercial side is just as complicated, if not more complex, than the retail side. And that we're really, glad to have both of you on the case of how can we solve some of these problems? How can we keep ahead of it? And again, I'm now going to be coming to you even more often to say, what are you seeing? Help me see what I need to see from the retail perspective. It's also just a good reminder that, it's not always which car you have. It's whether your car is working, right? It's a working asset. I like this idea. It wouldn't be worse if humans actually looked at our own personal vehicles as assets too, right? Sometimes we get too lazy with that, but I think it's a great perspective to have. So thanks again for the conversation. Thanks, to both of you guys for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
And thanks, of course, to everyone listening to the Auto Market Brief. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share the show with your friends and colleagues. As always, remember to check out all of our insights and updates at coxautoinc.com, and stay tuned to the Auto Market Brief for all of our high notes in the economy, the headlines that matter across the industry, and more awesome conversations like this that help us just get a better sense of the market. So thank you both.